we were the smart ones that were supposed to make the right decision, who told us wisely, so he thought, that we as women should marry guys who had already been married once. Because I do still care what people think, in the sense that I want to be seen as kind, show up as who you are, and the people that are meant for you will be attracted to you. He had no problem looking to me and making me feel like I was responsible for making the right decision. The closer we've gotten to being equal, the more terrified men are and the more they're acting out to keep it. It makes me feel better about me, it makes me feel better about women in general, and it makes me feel like we are so much stronger when we do things together. Hello, and welcome to Wonder in the Weeds, the show where we talk about how we are living and thriving and surviving a world full of constant change and challenge and grief, and doing both at the same time, navigating all of those problems and learning how to live and love amongst them. Welcome. I'm your host, Ritz-King, and today we are going to talk about the weeds of the week. This is kind of a broad category, but the weeds feel like they are just the simple act of being a woman in the world today. And that's also where the wonder is going to come from. So let's talk about how I came to this conclusion. I am raising two girls and I am living as a woman in the world. And I am in a time of transition where I'm really questioning sort of my role in the world, and also gestures to all the things that are happening. Assaults on our rights to do what we need to with our own body, attempts to take away our right to vote, attempts to gaslight us all into thinking none of that stuff is actually happening, or that it's all for our own benefit. You can't open a social media app lately without seeing somebody extolling the virtues of traditional motherhood and wifedom. And it's all a really thinly veiled attempt to control and silence women. And it is exhausting. And also, I see sort of at the same time this rise, and probably because of this is why we're getting so much pushback and hate, but the rise of just powerful, exciting, impressive women in all arenas of the world. So I want to tell you a little story. So two things. I referenced this before on the show, where I saw a meme that said middle age or 50s, your 50s specifically, is like being your 16-year-old self again, but loving her this time. And I can't get that out of my head. It's really been something, obviously, I've now talked about it twice on the show, and it's really been something that I have been dwelling on a lot, because I think I'm also at this sort of transitional time of what is my role in the world. And I talked about this on the show before when I talked about being an empty nester, like trying to figure out my purpose for like the next, 30 years or whatever. And in doing those two things and sort of reflecting on who I was at 16 and who I am now, and how do I love that 16-year-old version of myself better now than I did then, I think of this one story. And I was a little older than 16, but you get the idea. I was a senior in high school. I am of the age where Students Against Drunk Driving and Mothers Against Drunk Driving, so MAD and SAD groups, were sort of in their heyday. Well, I don't know, maybe they're a big deal now still, but they were sort of new when I was in high school. We had chapters at our school that were fairly new. And I was something, maybe the vice president of, or like secretary, I don't know, some officer role of Students Against Drunk Driving my senior year of high school. I was also dating a boy who was on the football team. And I think it was either the first year or the second year, but I think it was the first year of the after-prom party, where the school tries to do a post-prom event. Now they're like a big deal, at least where I was in Jersey and in Maryland. I'm not sure if they are big out in the Midwest, but essentially it was a way to host the kids after prom in an attempt to not have them just go somewhere and get drunk. The irony is, in Jersey, at least, they would have these big, elaborate after-prom parties, and then the kids would leave them and go get drunk somewhere. So it basically just postponed the getting drunk part until later in the evening. But my senior year of high school, it was the first year they were doing it. And I can't remember the details. I can't remember if SAD, I feel like probably Students Against Drunk Driving, the SAD group, was like sponsoring it in some way, or was like somewhat in charge of it. And it was going to be like at a rec center, and we were going to have like, I don't know, like a dunk tank. I don't know, some stupid stuff that they thought high school kids would be excited about enough to skip after prom parties. Simultaneously, my boyfriend at the time was planning a party back at his house after prom, where we were all come and spend the night and get drunk. Any other manner of things. I can't remember. I'm sure his parents knew. I don't even know if they might have been away. I don't know. It feels like that year's kind of a blur. We mostly spent time at people's homes where their parents weren't in town. Sorry, parents. They might have even known that we were going to do it, but we were just all good and they didn't care as long as we spent the night, which quite honestly, if we're talking about students against drunk driving, we weren't drunk driving. We were staying the night. So anyway, I'm telling you this story to tell you, my boyfriend was like a beloved character. He actually, I think, teaches at the school now, which is kind of fun. But he was a kid. He was a good guy, and he was a really sweet kid. And so teachers loved him and teachers loved me. This one teacher who had us both, I don't think my boyfriend was part of Students Against Drunk Driving, but he was definitely like, he's that kid that you like tag as a teacher, as like somebody who's a leader in the school. And we both were. I'm telling you this to tell you that when word got out that my boyfriend was having an after-prom party at his house and he didn't want to go to the post-prom party, I was like, let's just go to the post-prom thing first and then we'll go to your house so that I can like make an appearance and at least look like I'm doing the right thing. And he didn't want to go, I think, because he was hosting. And so he like wanted to just get back to his house and start a party. Also, he thought it was dumb and he wasn't wrong, but it was part of, my group that I was running. So I felt like I had to support it in some way. But ultimately, I didn't go. I didn't go to the post-prom hosted by the school because I went to his. And the teacher, the grown-ass man who was the teacher and the like sponsor of the club, there's no other way to say it than shamed me for that choice. He didn't shame my boyfriend. He didn't give my boyfriend a hard time for hosting the party. He gave me a hard time for not convincing him otherwise, or at least convincing him to go to this party. And this teacher just made such a big deal. You're the vice president of this club. You and your boyfriend are leaders. You should be showing the rest of your class what to do. Because my argument was like, no one is going to this thing. Like, unless your parents are making you, no one is going. Everybody that he had invited to his post-prom party was coming straight to his house. No one was going to this thing. And I was like, I don't feel like I should have to go. Like, it wasn't our idea. It wasn't the students' idea. I think the school decided they wanted to do it. Obviously, it's 100 million years later, so the details are a little fuzzy. But what isn't fuzzy and what remains like in part of who I was, the way that guy turned on me, that teacher turned on me. He went from being like my number one cheerleader guy, like everybody's favorite teacher, to this jerk of an adult man shaming this teenage girl for a decision her boyfriend was making. The boyfriend didn't get shamed. As far as I can imagine, he'll probably like text me later and be like, I was shamed too, which is possible, but he just didn't care. And I felt like I had let down the whole world in this decision. And I was like in between a rock and a hard place. Like, do I disappoint? Like, my boyfriend didn't want to go. And of course he wanted me to be with him at prom. And this teacher who was trying to make me feel like I was like betraying my entire purpose if I went to this after prom party at his house versus the school sponsored one with no alcohol and a slip and slide or whatever the hell it was going to be. Anyway, I'm telling you this story to tell you that when I think of now, the sort of assault on women that is now, the 16-year-old version of me, really I was 17 or 18 at the time, but you know what I mean, the high school version of me, I think, oh, it wasn't much different then. We just didn't see it as clearly and it wasn't as blatant. Again, I need to stress, this was a grown man high school teacher who tried to shame a young girl into doing something he thought was the right decision, never taking into consideration how she might feel about it. Just decided I should be the one to make the right decision. Not my boyfriend, not the 18-year-old boy, but the girl who was sort of only tangentially related to this thing. Even though we were both leaders in the school, we were both people that according to this teacher, people looked up to. And he even said to me, people look up to you and your boyfriend. So he admitted this boy was part of the solution, according to him, that we needed to be there to represent, what students should be doing on prom night and how it would look if we hosted a party instead. I don't know how we were hosting a party. We weren't married. It was this kid hosting a party. I happened to be his date. Never did he get shamed for it, but I did. And I think that's so indicative of what happens, that women are supposed to make the right choice. We're supposed to somehow talk to or persuade or get the men to do the right thing. And we also are going to be the ones punished if it doesn't happen, not the men who actually made the choice to begin with. And I know some of you are probably listening and being like, ooh, this is kind of a stretch. And you're not totally wrong. It's kind of a stretch. But the fact that it sticks with me 30 some years later, this guy, meaning the teacher, sort of turned on me like that as a kid means something, right? Like, why was his scapegoat for the success, or why was he pinning the success or not success of this entire thing on me? I wasn't even in charge of the event. I was like the vice president or the recording secretary or something. Like, yes, an officer, but not one that like made big decisions. And yet he had no problem looking to me and making me feel like I was responsible for making the right decision. Not the guy, but me. I don't know. It's not a metaphor. The English teacher ex-boyfriend would probably correct me there. But it's sort of a symbol of what happens even still. There's all these men out here making decisions for women, and yet women are the ones that are supposed to feel bad or course correct when everything goes to hell. And it just feels like, oh, this has been going on my whole life and I'm just now seeing it. And one of the things I've noticed recently, and another reason why maybe I've become a little bit more feral in all of this, is I've noticed with my girls, they just take less shit. Excuse my language. My girls just take less shit than I did as a kid. And I was a pretty outspoken young woman. I was pretty, I grew up in a house full of women, a single mom. My older sister was 20 years older than me and was like a pioneer in Title IX sports. And like, just, she didn't take anything from anybody. And so I sort of learned from them, like, you got to stand up for yourself because no one else is going to stand up for you. And women, especially, no one's going to stand up for you. And we deserve all the things that men get. Those were the sort of subtle lessons in my house. And in a less overt way, the lessons were also, we are to accommodate men. And your life is easier with a man in it. And ultimately, what you want is to have a man. So my mother was single, but she was widowed and she never remarried. She would say, like, I fell in love once, I don't need to do it again. In her later years, she definitely referenced like wishing she had married or met somebody to at least be a companion. Occasionally she joked that she wished she had met a rich guy so that, she could be taken care of in her old age. So there were sort of subtle messages there that your life is easier with a man. For certain, I can remember a few occasions telling her like my dreams for, as a middle school or high school or college kid, my dreams for the world. And she would often say, I hope you marry rich. Like, I couldn't possibly do the things I was saying I wanted to do if I didn't marry somebody who had a lot of money. So that, whether she meant it or not, that's a lesson, right? Like, oh, well, you girl can't do this thing on your own. You got to find a dude to support you and pay for you, basically. And obviously in high school, I got the message that we were the smart ones that were supposed to make the right decision. I don't remember if this was the same teacher. I don't think it was. I think it was a different teacher, but there was a teacher in high school also who told us wisely. So he thought that we as women should marry guys who had already been married once. Because, and like, he didn't mean it as a slam on women, but it was sort of like, you all are so much more advanced and mature. Like, marry somebody who's already been through it once because now he knows what he did wrong and hopefully he'll be better to you. And I thought, like, well, first of all, the poor first wife, that sort of stings for her. But also, like, that's not very hopeful for either men or women, that you think that men are like, we're never going to find somebody who's going to figure it out before meeting us. So that felt a little rough too, but it's like another example of the sort of subliminal messages I got as a woman that led me to behaving in such a way that was accommodating to men, that was looking out for, how do I make myself palatable for this one guy or this group of guys, or, sometimes it's a safety thing. Like, how do I make myself sort of invisible so that I'm not in danger with this group of men or whatever. It affected the way I dressed. It affected the way I talked. It affected the way I acted. It affected the things I was into. I learned about sports, or I talked about sports in a way that sort of ingratiated me with guys. I didn't talk about fashion and makeup and things like that I really loved. I started to maybe try to like get into whatever stuff they were into, whether it was sports or outdoor stuff or whatever. I tried to get into it so that they could get in, so that I could like have a connection point. And not all of this is bad. Like, if you're going to be in a relationship with somebody, there's ways to learn about each other's likes and dislikes. But looking back on it, I had zero consciousness of doing this back then. But looking back on it, I recognized that what I did was kind of try to fit myself into places where I thought men would welcome me or have me be. And I also tried to make, male bosses or male teachers or professors or mentors in school, I tried to sort of do what I thought they wanted me to do, rather than showing up as me and doing the job or doing the work as myself and then sort of, navigating it that way. I sort of was always thinking, how am I going to make this person happy with me before I thought about anything else. How do I please this person, this man in charge? And I do not see my girl doing that. My oldest specifically. I don't know about the middle one. I haven't paid as much attention for various reasons. She's always been sort of hard-headed and bullish. So I don't know how much of that is just born into her versus the older one. I feel like hers is a little bit of a conscious choice. It wasn't as a young girl. As a young girl, she was just this like gung-ho, I do what I want. I'm not in a selfish way, not in a like I'm not considering other people, but in a like I'm not going to make myself small for you. She says what she means and she does what she wants, and it's a beautiful thing. But I see it now as an adult in the world of dating and making new friends as we moved out here and all of this stuff. She just has this beautiful ability to show up as herself authentically in an attempt to attract people to that rather than fit into places where she wants to be with people. And I so admire that. And I recognize in her that I didn't do that as much. I like to think of myself as like somebody who's very, independent and confident and things like that. But when I watch her, I realize, oh no, I have spent most of my life trying to figure out what people want me to be and then being that. So now when, I read this thing about your 50s is this time where your 16-year-old self shows up, but now you love her. I feel like this is almost a do-over. Like now I get to go into the world. This is sort of the beautiful thing. People talk about aging, women specifically talk about how aging is so great sometimes because you just don't care anymore. I almost couldn't totally relate to that because I do still care what people think in the sense that I want to be seen as kind, of service to people and things like that. So I do think about how I behave in a way that I wonder, I do care how people perceive me. And I also care much less now about being acceptable or palatable. I've always preached to my daughters, like just show, actually, and my son too, like show up as who you are and the people that are meant for you will be attracted to you. Don't try to be something that you think they want you to be because you can't sustain that. In my adulthood, I can see that I didn't exactly follow my own rules when I was a kid. I was talking about this with my husband the other day about how I think I kind of got lucky because with him, I really did show up as my full self. And he, for some reason, thought it was good rather than kind of try to figure out. I think because I had a little bit of a harder time trying to figure him out. So I just was like, all right, well, this is who I am. I think at some point you were attracted to me. So I'm just going to keep being me and hope that that works. And it did. And lucky for both of us over the last 30 some years, we've been able to sort of evolve together. We are not the same people we were when we met, but also our souls are still the same. And so we've been able to grow and change with one another. But I think some of that was luck because up until him, I had not dated people as my full self. I had been very accommodating of who they were until it ended. I ended a couple of my relationships because I think I just got tired of doing that, of like being something that I didn't really feel like it fit with who I really was. But with him, I never showed up differently. And yet, even with this most supportive, wonderful human being in my corner, I have still, as I've gotten older, realized how much I have made myself small or made myself fit into certain places, in spite of preaching the exact opposite to every woman that I know. And I see the younger generation not doing that. And I'm so inspired by them. In fact, I want to do a podcast episode with my daughter and talk about this very thing, about sort of what feminism looks like as a 23-year-old versus a 52-year-old, and what it looked like for me at 23 versus what it looks like for her. But to get back to sort of the weeds of it, it's been almost like a daily reckoning, if you will, as I watch the news, as I walk out into the world, as I see things with almost like I put on different glasses. Now I have like feminist lenses now that I didn't used to have, that I see interactions and expectations a little bit differently than I used to before, or I see them for the first time in a way that I didn't see them before. And so I'm feeling sort of drawn toward, okay, well, what do I do now as this woman in her 50s to not only sort of nurture the 16-year-old me and come fully into what my femininity is now, but also to give back to women around me so that they either don't have to live through it the same way or that the future for them looks better than certainly what it feels like it's going to look like right now as they just continue to sort of chip away at our human rights. And I think there's, the metaphor that we talk about this a lot in when you talk about abusive relationships or relationships with like a narcissist or something, we talk about slow boil. I don't even remember what animal, maybe a frog. Like a frog doesn't realize it's in boiling water until it's too late. I think it's a frog. I don't know. Clearly, I'm not great at metaphors today. But the idea is that you don't realize you're in a pot of boiling water until it's boiling because it heats up slowly. And so it's not like somebody drops you into a pit of despair and you realize it right away, but it is a slow process. And so then it's too late. By the time you recognize that you're in trouble, it's kind of too late. So I feel like that's a little bit of what I have felt recently of I feel like that's how I felt. Gosh, I'm a therapist who talks about feelings all day long because that was such an eloquent sentence. I feel like I felt. Anyway, clearly I'm a little agitated with this whole topic, but I have recently felt like I'm noticing the boiling water before it's too late, but also I have to sort of look back and try to find when did I get into the pot? This has obviously been my whole life, and I'm undoing and unraveling the sort of societal stuff that gets you here. Even for somebody who, like I said at the beginning of this, grew up in a house that was like all women all the time. My poor brother, he was around, but he was surrounded by women and empowered women and women who weren't afraid to, fix their own pipes and things like that. Change a tire, like, dude stuff, if you will, play sports and argue and debate and things like that. I feel a little bit like what I'm seeing now is that I had a false sense of security when it came to being an empowered woman because I was still doing a lot of the things that I have been taught are not very empowering, like trying to fit into a space, trying to accommodate others' feelings, trying to please men in a way. And I'm glad to some degree I haven't passed that on to my daughter, but I am also really conscious of the fact that I need to fight like hell right now to make sure she has a future where she doesn't ever have to do that. And it almost feels like the closer we've gotten to being equal, the more terrified men are and the more they're acting out to keep it from continuing. And that can be really disheartening, which is why I picked it as the weeds of this week, because there are definitely days where I feel like, what is even the point? Sometimes I feel like, what is even the point? And sometimes I feel like, God, I wish I just didn't notice because sometimes I think maybe the animal in the pot of boiling water doesn't have it so bad for those first few, however long it takes for it to actually boil. Like if you don't feel it till the very end, well, maybe that's not terrible. These are the defeated thoughts I have sometimes when it comes to this kind of feminine empowerment is like, I either feel like dejected, can't believe we're still here and we're still fighting. My sister, who's 20 years older than me, was fighting for the same things when she was 20, 30, 40, 50. Or that my daughter, who's, 30 years younger than her, is going to have to fight for too. Sometimes can feel really overwhelmed and dejected by all of the whole prospect of it. On the other hand, sometimes feel like, gosh, I wish I just didn't even know. It would be a lot easier. And I have to fight both of those things. I have to fight both of those feelings because neither one of those is helpful. Ignoring it until it's too late is not helpful to me or any other woman I know. And being sort of down in the dumps, dejected by it, feeling defeated by it isn't helpful either. And ultimately, it's not helpful for me because who wants to feel like that all the time? So almost on a daily basis, I am really looking for the wonder and trying to fight through the weeds of women's rights and empowerments. And my field is maternal mental health and trauma. So there's a lot there. I've sort of been in the thick of the way women have been mistreated in an obvious way. When you work with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, that's the sort of obvious, right? That's the obvious way that we've been mistreated. It's been recently where I see it sort of trickle out and be everywhere. In every way, we're mistreated. It's just more subtle in some ways than others. And if we're not specifically mistreated or pointedly mistreated, we're sort of conditioned in a way that is not to our benefit either. So that's where I am lately in the weeds of it all, is trying to unravel or unlearn some of that conditioning in my own self, and then desperately trying to speak out and make sure that it doesn't trickle down to the younger generations. And then the third thing is the action necessary to keep those things from happening. So staying politically involved, staying on top of the movement, if you will, and on a smaller scale or on a more sort of personal scale, continuing to do the work that I do, volunteering for agencies that do that same kind of work, educating where I can, digging in and learning myself too, more about feminism and the movement and empowerment and all of that stuff. The law, sometimes I reach out to my lawyer friends to be like, what does this really mean? And I reach out to, medical friends to be like, what does this really mean for us medically? So I've just kind of tried to keep my brain involved in it and my actions involved so that I can be both part of the learning and the education of it and the solutions if necessary too. But it's exhausting. So that's why it's weedy, because it's exhausting. And sometimes it's heartbreaking. And sometimes it can get you really to a place where you just don't want to do it anymore. And I don't mean in an existential way. I mean, like physically, you just don't feel like it. You want to disengage and know about any of it anymore. So what's the wonder then? How is this both weeds and wonder? I started this episode by saying women and our rights and freedoms are both the weeds this week and the wonder. And I spoke on another episode about the women's basketball tournament that we got a chance to go to and how it was so exciting to be part of that. And it's so exciting to be, just surrounded by people, men and women and boys and girls, all cheering for this women's basketball team in the same passionate way. That's exciting. That's sort of an extreme version of it. Like you don't always get the chance to go to an NCAA in person. That wonder isn't available to everybody all the time. But a couple other things I did was for my own self and then for those around me too. I have been looking for things that I'm interested in, but women only spaces. So for instance, both pickleball and golf, I have gotten into recently. I know I'm such a cliche, right? You're like 50-year-old woman with an empty nest suddenly is playing pickleball and golf. Shocker. It almost feels too easy, but they're just the right level of competitive, but not too serious for me. I was like, do I want to do master swimming? Do I want to start running again? There's all these things. And I was like, no, those are all too competitive, quite frankly. And things like, Pilates and fitness classes, while I love them, they're not really like community oriented. Also, there's not as much of a learning curve. Golf and pickleball, like there's a learning curve. I'm like a brand newbie at all of these things and have to learn. And I have stayed away from golf for years because to me, it's such a like dude centered activity that I really felt it like I wasn't welcome in places. In spite of my husband inviting me to the place and really nobody being super rude. There's a little bit of a judgment there, but I have not felt welcome on golf courses in most of my life, except when I played with my older sister and her 3 women friends. They would occasionally bring me as like a substitute when her foursome didn't have somebody. And I loved that. I loved that experience. And then I would try to go out again with my husband and I just wouldn't like it as much. And so when I decided to get a little bit into it, I thought I'm going to look for groups where it's women or teachers that are women or something. And I was able to find both golf and pickleball with all women. And it's been fantastic to be surrounded. So to feel new, and a little unsure. And, I'm a competitive person. So to feel a little bit like, ooh, I don't know if I can do this or not. But to do that in a space where it's all women, even the ones that are really good and can sometimes be just as judgy. It's just a different type of connection. And it makes me feel better about me. It makes me feel better about women in general. And it makes me feel like we are so much stronger when we do things together. And we have every right to be on that golf course as anybody else. So that's one thing, is that I've gone and I've tried to find groups of women to be in community with doing something. It just happens to be sports in this case. So that's a little bit masculine in general, I think. Like that's what we're conditioned to think, is that sports are masculine, especially golf. And actually pickleball too can get a little bit like duty. I used to play back when I lived in Jersey and I actually stopped because the court was kind of, I called them finance bros at the time, but it would be like dominated by just these, like, if you're from the area, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say like, it was just like gym bros that would be, or like guys my age who thought they were still gym bros who would be at these pickleball courts. And it just did not feel like a welcoming environment. I have zero idea if they were kind or not. They might have been the nicest guys in the entire world, but you would walk into that room and be like, this is not a place for me, and walk out. So I stopped playing then, which is part of the reason why I looked for a women's group this time, because at least the giant facility is mixed of men and women. At least I know my people are women, and it just feels different. There's like things you don't have to worry about. Your guard can be a little bit down. You don't have to worry about your safety most of the time. There's wonder in that. There's wonder in just going into a place and feeling welcome and feeling accepted and feeling like you belong there is wonderful. So that's the wonder that I have right now, is like spaces full of women. And I shouldn't even say full of women, because there's a bar here in town. I think I've referenced it before on the show. I know Faith and I have referenced it on our show. It's called A Bar of Their Own. And it's a sports bar, but it's only women's sports. And so the crowd is men and women, but and plenty of non-binary folks and plenty of, that's the thing. Like the crowd is mixed, but the sports are women's sports. And so there's an understanding of what's going to happen there. And there's an understanding of like who is welcome there. And it's so great to walk in and just feel like, yeah, I'm supposed to be here. The only time I sometimes don't feel like I'm supposed to be there is because I'm maybe the only straight person in the room, but whatever, nobody cares. We're all there to watch sports. And so it does feel different than in a lot of the rest of the world. And so especially now when we are sort of faced on a daily basis with much of the world not wanting us to have our basic human rights, finding spaces where you can go and feel like not only are you welcome and accepted, but you're empowered. And as a group, you are powerful to be there too. So that's the wonder for me, is that I've been able to find these really amazing spaces full of women. I don't know, just make me feel good. And so that fortifies me to then go back out and keep fighting for the girls that come after me and the women that come after me, that they don't have to deal with some of this stuff the same way, and to have really open and frank conversations with my girls about how, and my boy, about how they can walk through the world in a way that's empowering for them and their girlfriends as well. So the weeds and the wonder this week, just the ladies. It's women. It's women and our rights and what we've been taught and how we show up in the world and what we are entitled to feel good about and feel safe about is both the weeds and the wonder. As usual, the women are the solution. All right, that's all I got this week to go fight the good fight again. Take care, everybody. And until next time I see you, keep looking for the wonder in the weeds. Bye.